All
All
right,
right.
for this.
And away we go. So, just a quick small correction. Oh, I have to say okay to the bar that says it's being recorded. All right, cool. That helps. Okay, so small correction. My Dharma name is actually Daisho, just two syllables. And the only reason I get a little anxiety over when people mess it up is because Daisho means something very different. I am not calling myself a great teacher. Um, my full name is Myokan Daisho, and let me, so Myo is like shows up a lot and can mean wondrous or subtle. In this case, Jane said she didn't write it in English, so I'm gonna go with wondrous insight, great laugh. So show could be joy or laugh, but so so yeah, I go by Daisho Chris Burnham. Um, and I am not an ancestor. So yeah, so I've been a student of Peter and Jane Schneider since 2010. That's when I started practicing with them at Beginner's Mind Zen Center, and sort of from the get-go, I started hearing about Tassajara, and way earlier than any reasonable person should. I started thinking about ordination, but Peter's like, well, maybe give it some time, and um, enough time passed and I was still interested. And so, yeah, Jane ordained me as a priest in 2023. Oh, wow, gosh. Coming up on 2 years. It's wild. All right. So, so there's some extra stuff. Mark Fraser is also part of our Sangha. He was one of our contingent to go to Tassajara for Sangha Week not too long ago. So he got a big ol' helping of Zen forms not too long ago, and that's what my talk is about. I just titled it "What's So Great About Zen Forms," and I think it's a decent chance that a lot of you already have noticed some of the things I wanted to talk about. So this is just I wanted to share some of my thoughts about it. But before I get too much into that, I just wanted to say to all of you, the whole Santa Barbara Zen Sangha, thank you so much for inviting me to give a talk. I'm really honored and humbled that I was invited. Um, so thank you very much for the opportunity to share some thoughts that I've had on this topic. Um, I also wanted to start off by thanking and acknowledging my teachers, Jane and Peter Schneider, who, as you heard, were the founders of Beginner's Mind Zen Center in Northridge, Los Angeles. And also, just to say, this talk is just to encourage you in your practice. A special shout out to Greg Fain because he was my teacher for a while, and that's how he starts his talks. And he said it was okay if I did it too. So, there are a lot of reasons why I think Zen forms are so great, and I'm going to try to succinctly discuss most or all of them. But every time I do a Zen form is like a new way to appreciate it. And that's one of the things I think is so great about them. But so, as I was saying, probably most of you are very familiar with Zen forms. We start learning about Zen forms starting with our first visit to a Zen center. And just to make sure we're on the same page, when I say forms, I'm sort of speaking of certain things we do and the way we do things. So in the Navy, like a salute, that would be like a Navy form. They call those customs and courtesies. So that same sort of stuff that we do in Zen, we call forms, or so I've heard. It seems to be the going vocab word. And I think they're kind of an underrated aspect of Zen practice, but they're actually a really big part of Zen practice. So like for us, examples would be like how we hold our hands depending on what we're doing. Like if we're just walking, we might hold our hands in shashu, or like bowing, put our hands in gasho, lift our hands above our ears. Sometimes it's which foot do we use when we enter the space? Where do we bow? How do we bow? How do we offer incense? How do we move around the room? Like, do we just stay at right angles in the perimeter? Does that matter? It can vary from place to place. How we put on our robes, how we wear our robes, which robes we wear, etc., etc., etc. So, one thing that I think makes forms so great is that they give shape to our activity and the space and the time that we're practicing in a very real way, I feel that it's no small part our practice through Zen forms that actually makes a room a Zendo or a Buddha hall instead of like a karate dojo or a yoga studio. Like a bundt cake is only a bundt cake, for instance, because the cake batter is poured into a bundt cake form for baking. So similarly, we collectively pour our activity into these forms while we are in these spaces, and thus we create a Zen temple. Participating in the activity of a Zen temple is also pretty cool because of how old many of these forms are. When we offer incense, we are embodying the activity of countless monks who lived and practiced throughout the world over many hundreds of years. When we bow, it is like we are connected to every Buddhist who has ever bowed. Our practice keeps these practices alive and maintains a continuity all the way from our modern lives back to Shakyamuni himself. In Zen, we place most emphasis on meditation, of course, but there's also plenty of textual study. And the forms are what give Zen its devotional aspect. At first glance, devotional practices might seem much less practical than Zazen. Maybe they seem like a little bit more than window dressing or maybe even mild superstitions. A common question that comes up when folks are being introduced to Zen is, why do we bow? And really, when we're holding our hands a certain way, or when we bow and we lift Buddha's feet above our head, what are we actually doing? When we put our robe on top of our head for chanting the Akesa, what are we doing there? What's the point of any ritual? Well, on top of the other stuff I mentioned, devotional practices, for us forms, are the way we show respect to the spaces and the entire practice of Zen. Showing respect is a very good thing. To some extent, it conditions our attitude toward the spaces we use to practice Zen and the practice itself. And this can help our motivation. Like if whenever we go to the Zen center, we're very, kind of focused and deferential and intentional, that conditions our attitude towards the space and towards the practice. And I've noticed, at least for me, that has an effect on how I feel about doing it. And it kind of creates a place physically and mentally that I want to go to, especially if I've been to the grocery store, just out in the world. It's like, I get some peace and some devotional activity for a little bit. But also, showing respect is just the right thing to do. This practice is powerful and transformational, and it has been developed and passed down to us by many thousands who have gone before us and devoted their lives to transmitting the Dharma. The Eightfold Noble Path includes right action, and this respect definitely counts. In these and other ways, being reverent and showing respect is as beneficial to our spiritual growth as reflection and contemplation. Now I'm getting to the points of forms that I think make them really great. So forms complement our sitting practice in two ways. First, we hold the forms, then the forms hold us. Depending on the temple we're at, there could be a bunch of forms or a few. They might be practiced very rigidly or more relaxed. But in all cases, they show us our minds, as well as guide our minds to the present moment. When we are thinking about which foot to use, or listening to which bell is ringing and remembering to bow or not bow, or holding our hands in a certain mudra, or anything else like that, we have to focus our attention on what we're doing in the present moment. If we mess up a form, maybe because we're daydreaming, our attention gets snapped back to the present moment. This exercise in intentional focus is a different way to do off the cushion what we are trying to do while on it. Keep coming back to the present moment. But then, when we have internalized the forms and we know them well, they become more automatic. So at this point, they offer us a container. So we can think less about what we are doing and just continue the effort of seated zazen even when we get off the cushion. We can just let ourselves experience the present moment and enjoy that experience for what it is. My last thought is just this. Forms direct us toward and help hold us in the present moment, here and now, where our lives are. This is really nice for, among other reasons, the simple and important fact that we can't find any liberation or contentment anywhere besides here and now. Our intentional action, guided by the forms, shapes our momentary existence into something elegant, reverent, and peaceful. And this, in turn, makes the ground of our lives more fertile for cultivating awakening, practice enlightenment, freedom, and joy. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and please take very good care of yourselves.
Daisho, thank you so much for that really, really helpful sharing with us this morning. I think before we open it up to questions and answers, it might be nice for you to get a sense of who's here, just because we have a few new faces in the rooms, or faces that are not with us very often. So if it's okay with you, I'll have everyone in the room introduce themselves just by name, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments on your talk.
Yep, that
So,
would be great.
Juliana, I'm not seeing great here, but I'm gonna try to be Steven Spielberg with this iPad here. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Juliana. Oh, I'm Allison.
Ken. Alan.
Elisa.
No.
Josephine.
Brad. I think that covers, and I'm Dave. Butcherer of names is my Dharma name.
Well, you're in good company, so that's cool.
So take a deep breath and feel free to jump in with any questions or comments you have on Daisho's presentation this morning.
I'm a great believer in momentum, and hearing you talk about that connection when we bow, that we're connected with a tradition that goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years, or lighting the incense. And I was just thinking that I hadn't thought in these terms exactly before, but when we engage in these forms in the temple or here in the temple, that okay, we put our body in a certain position, and then hopefully our mind comes along. So you're building momentum within yourself at that stage. And then could there be a group momentum also? Others are dressed in a certain manner, you see them doing it. And so really, ideally, you have are you trying to create an individual, a group, and then with that connection to people to monks and so on that were doing these traditions thousands of years ago? I mean, is that all is that a way that we can develop momentum to propel ourselves and get us grounded in the now?
I would say absolutely, yes. And I like that, I like what you pointed out, how um, like, so in multiple ways, and I've heard this is something they've elaborated on through, psychological studies, sort of more in like, sort of hard science nowadays, showing the connection between what we call our mind. We think it's just the brain, but it's not. But regardless of where exactly it's located, showing the connection between our physical, what we would feel like is just our body, not the mind, and the mind itself. Um, like I heard, and I'm not sure if this is really true or not, but I think I've tried it and seen it can be true that basically making yourself smile, maybe not sarcastically, but just trying to genuinely like hold a smile actually can have an influence. Just like how if I feel happy inside, then the outside will smile, and I can sort of there can be like a two-way street to that. So when we put our body in the posture of a Buddha, then we're sort of helping guide our mind in that direction as well. And I would definitely say that counts as momentum. Then with the group aspect of it, it's like peer pressure, but in a good way. I have noticed sitting in the Zendo at Tassajara, I'm way more encouraged to sit still and not just move at the slightest amount of discomfort. And when I'm alone, I'm much more prone to, yeah, adjusting my posture if I feel a need. Whereas and not just Tassajara, but City Center or Beginner's Mind Zen Center or any other time when I'm sitting with a group, um, the threshold beyond which what qualifies as something I should move or adjust my posture to address is much higher. And that is definitely because I've got people to the right, people to the left, people behind, all sitting still. And that encourages me. And I think that's part of what makes Sangha the most precious of the triple treasures or the three jewels, is that it's a hard thing to do what we're doing on our own. When we have other people that are doing it with us, that is a huge source of encouragement, a huge source of momentum. And, every little bit helps. So definitely thank you for your comment and question.
Ken?
I'd like to contribute that when I think of forms, uh, I contextualize it within choreography. And though I never was part of the military, I am in awe of the precision forms that they generate. Um, and For a period of time, I studied Tai Chi, and our teacher, Master Ni, would communicate that to practice these forms 10 times, 100 times, much different, 1,000 times, much different, 10,000 times, much different. So the same forms being practiced over and over again generates something qualitatively within us. And when those forms are expressed within a group setting, what happens for me is individual mind dissolves, and I am now participating in group mind or group mindfulness, which is much different.
I concur. And I think that's it's so it's funny because both in Zen and in the Navy, I've noticed they the institutions or the tradition, there's this sort of like aversion to it based on some fear of losing my individuality. So like when I told some friends like I was going to the Navy, they're like, "Oh no, you're gonna become like you're gonna get brainwashed and yada yada." And I was sort of worried about that, but also doing Zen practice, I'm like this. And I'm not saying I'm afraid, but I will say this fear comes up of like, I'm gonna disappear into like become a zombie or something like that. That popped up, hasn't popped up for a while, but it definitely popped up more early on. And what a few teachers and my own experience have shown me is that is impossible. um, it is kind of, I think, fair to say that we are trying as Zen students to loosen our attachment to our ideas of our small self. And I would say, even for me, loosen this almost like an infatuation I have with who I think I am. Um, it's a natural thing and it's a healthy thing, creating this sort of like avatar to interact with, like the 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 world as presented as it arises separate from me. So when you the whole like, oh, everything is one, right? When we get that, it's like, okay, yes, but we still, people always bring up cars and tigers and whatnot. And it's true. We have these small selves, and their mere existence is not a hindrance to enlightenment. It's just what can hinder practice or appreciating what actually is also true is again the firm attachment to our stories about ourselves. So in Zen temples, as we do these practices with a lot of other people, and just in general, as we just sit zazen, that sort of naturally loosens up a little bit. But we never stop being individuals in the conventional understanding of what we mean when we say we're individuals. We just get a lot of help from the group, in the group participation in these activities. So, like, same in the military. It's really kind of funny because uh, how how so not brainwashed everyone around me was. Like everyone around me was very much had really big, strong personalities, and so a lot of resistance during boot camp was. And I've heard the Marines can be different. I can't speak to that personally, but at least in the Navy, like even in boot camp, there's tons of resistance to like programming or whatever. And yet, when it was time for graduation, we all stayed in line. We all did the thing at the same time, and it was like a really wonderful dance in a way. I loved it. I love that observation that it's like choreography. Because I would say, yeah, definitely. The whole point of the shedding the attachment to the individual self in the military is, for the greater good, you might have to jump on a grenade or whatever, in like the most extreme possible idea of that. And other times it's like, some guy's been on watch for 5 hours, so stop thinking about how much your bed feels comfortable and get up and go take his spot because it's your turn, etc. So like that's the more, I guess, practical aspect to um, forms as a way of training out our attachment to our individual small selves for the military. For Zen, it's a very similar thing, but for a different end. Realizing that our individual small selves are kind of a fiction is really helpful for understanding the rest of reality, I guess, for lack of a better word. Because the conventional truth never stops being true. It just, we appreciate the limitations to that truth. There's so much more to everything. And, sort of by comparison, it seems like fake, but it's not. And I think that, anyway, sorry, I was told specifically try not to get off topic and lose the thread. So I'm just going to stop and ask the next person to say something.
Okay. Well, this will probably go off topic again, but so I'm assuming, or I'm guessing your day job is at Diablo Canyon. Am I right? So, thank you for your work producing carbon-free energy there. I think that's really important. But my question is, or my feeling is, I'm very the environment's really important to me, and I came to Zen practice really through its Taoist roots. So when I was at Tassajara, just walking in the wilderness there impressed me much more than being in the Zendo with the human forms, right? So there's nature, we can't match nature. It's so magnificent in it by itself. And um, and I found that going on long backpack trips has had a more profound effect on me, I think, than Zazen. So the forms, I do them because I like to sit with Zen groups, and the formal meditation brings me closer to nature. But I always feel that I'm just kind of going through the motions, because that's like the price of admission for sitting with a group. So I don't normally sit with this group, so don't hold my question against them.
Not at all. Ah, yes. Yes. So I haven't done like lots of long backpacking trips, or I've never done any backpacking. But I certainly like to walk on trails and whatnot. And I love sitting in nature. There's a particular rock at the top of Black Hill in Morro Bay, and every now and then I like to hike to up to that. It's a very small hike, so it even feels I'm a little embarrassed to call it a hike, but whatever. It's a small, short, delightful hike. And going up there and then sitting zazen on the rock is really nice. Being out in nature is really nice, and I love it. And um, and I get what you're saying. How and as being in a room, surrounded by people and things we've cut and shaped in wood or metal, or if in a modern building it's going to be drywall and plaster and there's electricity and all that stuff, it's going to have a different feel than nature. So in those instances, one thought I have is that, and it doesn't just have to be sort of holding a particular frame of mind out in the world, like at the grocery store or driving or whatnot, but anywhere, what we can do outside is try and keep with us what we're cultivating in a zendo. So in a yoga studio, well, so I'll go to the martial arts example because that kind of, so like in a karate dojo, we're practicing a thing, or like at a gym, we're lifting weights or whatever, but we're practicing a thing that we then take out with us into our lives. So there's formal Zen or Zazen practice in a room with people, and that does have a very large value to it. And it doesn't need to be compared to other things because it's all relevant, it's all good. I have had more interesting sort of experiences outside of a zendo than inside of it, but I firmly believe that those experiences would not have come to fruition if it weren't for the hours and hours and hours of sitting in a zendo. Um, so again, yeah, it's all part of the same team. It's all part of the same continuity, is our practice with the form of zazen, practice uh, staying in the present moment. And that's one thing that, in a way, I think makes zazen in a zendo, um, uh, that's a value that it has that I think being out in nature doesn't have, is it's such a tight container. We really get down to the meat and potatoes of the I guess shaping or training, and I 100% appreciate the notion of not going into Zazen with a gaining idea, because that's kind of counterproductive. And uh, there is a reason why we're doing this. There's a reason why we're sitting and facing a wall for 30-minute chunks at a time, maybe even longer, and why we do those chunks a lot over the course of weeks and whatnot, months, years, etc. So we can't train in nature the same way we train in a zendo. But out in nature is, I think, where we'll see some fruits of the training that we won't necessarily see in the zendo. We might see in the zendo, that's not the point. But getting to sit down on a rock at the top of, Black Hill in Morro Bay, and just appreciate it. It's not formal zazen training. I'm getting to use a zazen form. I'm getting to abstract a zazen form into a natural setting and just enjoy the connection with nature. And I get that because of the time I've spent in a zendo. That being said, uh, I did a practice period at Tassajara back in 2019, And there was a week where like every single day was just gray and rainy, and it is what it is, and it's got a certain enjoyability to it. Um, but then I think it was the fifth day. I think this might have been Sashin. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Anyway, so then one day it was like the most beautiful weather we've had in a while, and I was a little bit bad, and I decided to sign out of one of the periods of Zazen. I just signed out on the Tenkin pad, which is where if you are sick and not going to be present, that's where you just put a note so that they know why. So for the reason that I put sons out, monks out, and I went and sat zazen on a bench near the entry gate and just kind of looked and enjoyed looking at the ground and watching a squirrel out of the corner of my eye. So is that good? Is it bad? Is it better? Is it worse? Best, honestly, I think I'm better. I think my practice is better served if I just throw out all the comparing words and the impulse to compare. If I just look at that impulse and try and track that down instead of following it, oh, look, I'm comparing that. But yeah, I think it's better. So,
Thank you.
yeah, sir, yes.
I first should start by saying I met Peter in 1973 in Kyoto, Japan. And Peter helped me find a house to stay in and took care of me for the first few months I was out there. I was new in Japan. And then I didn't see much of him after that, but I kept hearing about him, so it goes back quite a while. Second thing I was going to say is because I was in Japan, I met the person who became my wife, who was a Japanese woman, and she bows at everything. And I realized in Japanese culture, it's also a cultural phenomenon that someone like my wife might say, I'm not religious, I'm not a Buddhist. She bows at Buddhist shrines, and she bows at everything, and including the actor whose porch ran into a tree in the Central Valley.
James Dean.
James Dean. When we first got to Japan, I pointed out to her they had put a kind of bumper-like thing around a tree. It turns out not to be the tree he hit, but it's at the little food restaurant there. And there's a memorial to James Dean there. And I explained that to my wife. And then every time we drove that road going up into the Central Valley, we're going 50 miles an hour, she turns and bows. And she had no idea who James Dean was, just that he was a famous person. And there's this sensibility, I think, in Japanese culture that translates into Zen and not into Chinese Buddhism. I was in China for a long time as well. It's different. Not one is better than the other. It's something very Japanese about what we're doing with bowing. She bows on the telephone. Always. And I pointed out to her and she says, oh yeah, well, I guess so. It's a gut response, but she doesn't feel, I don't think she uses it to get anything, no attainment. It's a natural expression of respect, not only for people, but for rocks and stones and nature. She'll bow to things out in the woods and so on. I can't think of an example right now. And a final comment, in China, mountains become associated with Buddhist practice, pilgrimage, and the shape of the body is often represented as a mountain. And the cycles of water and sun and wind are reflected through the forms of the body. And these create ritual patterns as well. And what was I learning that? Oh, on most sacred mountains in China, there are what are called meditation stones. And they're like your place on Black Peak. And there are beautiful big stones overlooking a valley, huge, well, huge enough for 2 or 3 people to sit on it, to sit in zazen on it as well, in meditation. And those are just scattered, they're there originally, they're part of the mountain, but they're located, the monks know where they are. So the Chinese incorporate a lot of Buddhism, a lot of nature into their formal ritual practice as well. So nature becomes part of the ritual. Just reflections on comments that you and others have made.
Thank you for sharing that. I would do well to try and be more like your wife, just bowing as an expression of inner reverence and nothing more. And I think that might be kind of like the smile is in one direction, I'm bowing as a way to try and cultivate my mind, and in other times, a mind that is currently experiencing reverence and respect will naturally pour out into a bow. This is, I forget what specific was said in the first comment, but how, in reference to Tai Chi, how doing something tens of times, hundreds of times, thousands of times, etc. Well, and I'm not immune to my mind wandering or kind of being on autopilot, not by a long shot. When I'm tuned in, whether because the forms got me to do that, or whether because, I don't know, I'm less distracted, or doesn't matter why. But it's just really cool to watch how any given bow is going to be its own thing. And in a way, I can answer my own asking of why am I bowing just by bowing and just by watching. That's one of the things that got me thinking about the forms enough where I wanted to do a talk about them, is just noticing how each bow is different, no matter how many times I've bowed, and how it's, have you guys heard the expression, it's like drinking water and knowing for yourself if it's warm or cold? That, but as a experience of bowing, uh, being the way to, not even, I wouldn't say it's an answer to the question, why do we bow? But it's a way to understand why we bow. I think that's different than coming up with an answer, although I guess that is ultimately what an answer is, so I'm not sure why I'm seeing a difference there, but yeah, there's a difference between answering a koan and just appreciating it or responding to it. And so, yeah, every single bow ends up being its own koan, where it's our participation in it that shows us something that we might think is worth seeing, maybe something we were looking for. So thank you for your comments.
I'm not sure who is next. I heard saw a couple hands over there. Ken?
I just had an epiphany on this, and that is that when I forget to bow, I engage in a completely different relationship to the things and people around me than when I remember to bow. And I was thinking about a conversation or an appeals with a judge on a Medi-Cal thing, and when I engaged with her, I forgot to bow, and And so the quality of the experience was very, very different than had I been in that more humble relationship to her. Not bowing, I was offensive. Bowing, I'm surrendering to the moment.
I definitely feel like I would have a different attitude towards a customer service representative if as soon as they say like, "Hi, I'm so and so, and how can I help you? This call may be recorded for training purposes." If I just started by saying, "Hello, thank you so much for taking my call," I think I would approach that situation way differently. At Tassajara, one of the practices is, and yeah, is you're walking around. If two people are approaching each other, then they'll stop at some point and bow and then move on. So, for one thing, a lot of people who come there for like a retreat, they aren't a student. So the students are all asked to follow that form and all the other forms. A lot of people who come because they are Zen students but are there for just to be there, they're not like part of the student apprenticeship thing, will just follow those. Like me and Mark and Danny, we're following that because that's what we were there for. We were practicing the forms. And then some people are familiar with Zen and will kind of do it, but you can't always, unless you've been there for a while, you're not really sure who's in which category. So sometimes the people who are there for a treat don't even know that that form exists. And so, you stop and you bow to them and they're just like, what? Because they didn't stop walking, they just kept walking. Or sometimes even it's like a student and like, but you're looking off to the side, and if you don't catch someone's eye, then it's kind of, you might bow and they might miss it, and then you're just like, okay. Or any other kind of a thing. Like if you're walking perpendicular to someone, is that so? My point is, even in this form, sometimes forgetting it or sometimes not being sure about it creates its own wonderful human moments that may or may not include a bow, but are nonetheless a great way of how the form can connect us to our lives in the present and to other people in the present with us. And those are really fun moments. But yeah, I think I'm going to try the thing with the customer service representative.
Chodo here. I wanted to pick up on that idea of learning the forms or maybe getting the forms wrong when you're learning them and the opportunity there, because I don't know about other Zendos, but in ours, if you're asked to join the Doan team or become Jisha or take on a role, you're holding the bunt pan. We don't sit down and take somebody into a room and give them a full outline and train them. It's kind of like, here's kind of how you should do this, jump in. And it's such a great chance to not be the competent person that we like to present ourselves as being. So I just wanted to throw that out and ask if you've had that same experience of sort of the joy of embracing being incompetent at something.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I love the feeling of it's like an intense, activated curiosity and just paying attention when someone gives me like a little bit of instruction and then I'm thrown into it. And so yeah, when I start trying to get people to do do-on jobs at Beginner's Mind Zen Center, like I'll offer them some tools and stuff, but a lot of times just to get them to start, I like to do that because when that happened to me, it was great. At Sangha Week, I had this is only my second time at Tassajara since ordination, and they let me be doshi, or the officiating priest, for service on 3 different occasions. It was a very short service that they do in the afternoon, but still, I was like, okay, all right, just remember, and then we just step back here. And actually, the third time I was pretty late, and it was weird because I was like very much in my head, but also like way connected to the present. So it was one of those cases where being in my head was not necessarily taking me out of the present, but basically like I was, you know, what I wasn't even sure if I was doing this or that. I can't remember, but I was like, oh wait, did we miss that part? Okay, I'll just look at the doan, and then when she like moves the striker to hit the bell, that's when I'll back up and get ready to bow. It's like, wait, unless she's completely waiting on me to do it. Oh wait, no, here's the part. I remembered. Yay. And then I finished the thing and we were already at the end. I was like, "Oh, I did miss the part." But the whole time basically was just this delightful uh ignorance and incompetence. And yes, it's a really wonderful place. And that's why, look, beginner's mind is sometimes it's something to kind of, sometimes it's not there because you're like, no, I know everything that's going on here and whatever, and that's no sin. But then when you get to be a beginner, like in a very more direct, completely way that you have no control over, that can be a wonderful experience. And processing it, if I just keep, it's just, what, the processing is, or the way in which that kind of like added to or enriched the practice in general, or at least gave me the opportunity to have the practice in that way. Just appreciating it is a wonderful, wonderful, delightful thing. So yeah, definitely concur with your observation, Dave.
Other comments or questions or reactions this morning? Yeah, Elisa.
Um, I guess my question is more having to do with um, releasing attachment to forms, because every Zen center has different forms, no matter how much they try to do the same thing. But and just, I don't know, being open or fluid enough to go with whatever is happening rather than what you think the Zen center should be doing, or the form activity. So, and a great example was when you were being doshi and forgot something, or so how did people react to this new way of doing it, I guess?
Well, as far as I could tell, everyone was just rolling with it, and Tassajara is good about that. Um, a lot of any kind of moments that rising up in my mind of like they're doing it wrong, you know, I've gotten in a good habit of laughing at it. Um, the stuff that comes up, I don't really have control over, um, but the reaction to it, I don't exactly have control over that either, but I have more of an opportunity to take different paths in the reaction to it. And so in general, so like I love this anecdote. So um, Greg Fain was at Tassajara for a very long time, and my first summer in 2011, I was still pretty new at this time and learning the forms and whatnot. And so the Ingawa is like the porch that completely goes around all four sides of the Zendo. And like you don't wear shoes when you go there. So like you take off your shoes as you're stepping onto it, and then there's a big shoe shelf you put it on, and then you go in the front door if the Han or the Densho is ringing, or you go in the back door if it's not to get inside the Zendo. But like you're not supposed. So the whole like bowing while you pass each other, not a thing on the Ingawa. And you're also not supposed to talk. You're supposed to hold your hands in shashu, etc., etc. So actually, I think that's all of the forms for the Ingawa. But in any case, so I'm walking on the Ingawa, and Greg Fain is walking in the other direction, and he's the head of practice. He's the Tanto. He stops and he bows, and so just reflexively, I also stop and bow. But then I go like, I thought we weren't supposed to bow on the Ingawa, and I'm confused. I'm trying to learn it, trying to I'm a new guy there, but I thought we weren't supposed to bow. And he's like, you're not supposed to talk either. So I really love that. I'm not sure if he was trying to trip me up or just messing with me for fun, but joy. These forms are not a cudgel to beat yourself or other people into conformity. Awakening, and I'm not, and I don't mean like, oh, crazy big enlightenment experience. I'm not talking about that. I'm just meaning like being here, the practice enlightenment, that kind of a thing. Joy is a huge component of that. And I don't think anything in Zen is being done right if it's robbing a person of joy. Well, and uh, pain and misery are a thing I've seen in the Zendo a lot. So it's not a 100% universally true thing. But yeah, I definitely think that the forms are there in large part to help us cultivate joy. And so being attached to the forms, if I notice myself being attached to the form, that's like a warning light. Like, hey, where's your mind, man? And I'm like, oh, good point. Yeah, thank you.
We have time for one more comment or reaction here.
Yeah.
Two. We have time for two.
You go.
Anyway,
first,
yeah, hi there. Thank you for your talk. Zen, and the Zen practice is so refined in so many ways and so intense. And I've loved it ever from a very early age, about 18 or 19, something like that. But also yoga practice for me at that same time. So I've brought the two of them along, throughout my life. And the contrast is just amazing because I'll go from like Tassajara or somewhere, and then to like a yoga ashram, and you've got all the bhakti and aside from the asana practice and through the body and the presence of the body, just beautiful practice also. Also sun salutation, all that bowing and full prostrations. And so, and then when you get to the devotional, and the joy of losing, and just going into it, coming from Zen, sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, and all the color and everything, So this contrast sometimes was causing me, I loved them both, but how to resolve them, And as I've matured over the years, they definitely, they fit, because they're aiming at the same thing ultimately, So it's just kind of fun.
Yeah, Zen definitely, I feel like gets a lot of shade for, you know, being, everything's in black or dark colors and the just a white plain wall and the sort of visual austerity of it all. I think it serves a very important purpose. And I also am glad that there's plenty of other places to go and experience that are more colorful and whatnot. And yeah, it's all good. Everything's on the same team. Like you said, they're all trying to go to the same place. Um, and I'm not going to get the same. I mean, yeah. So no.
I lived in Japan for a year, and I got to one of my students took me to a Buddhist center in Matsushima Bay, which was by Sendai. And so they have a beautiful temple there. And I was looking, you go in, and there's this classic room, and it was just beautiful. And the grounds were fantastic too. And there was a little plaque there. And I'm like almost 50 when I'm reading this, and it said, the people who built, it was in Japanese and English, and it said the people who built this, I'm not paraphrasing, of course, understood there's a technology engaged in, I can't remember, engaged in eliciting a certain response from the viewer. And and here I am 50, I look at that and I say, oh, so they didn't build this place to have lunch there. And I looked at it and it was obvious that it had no practical function, but still I was getting a tremendous a response to this building or to this structure. And I said, I'm 50 years old and I'm just realizing this. And then I turned to the left and there was a view to the outside and there were trees. And it was kind of a very similar kind of response, and both of them complemented one another. And so I think that's something that we're just beginning to understand. I imagine, particularly now with AI, we won't have to wash the dishes anymore, that we'll have time to start thinking, well, what is that response that we're eliciting? How does that work? And how can we elicit within human beings these dramatically positive responses, which are hopefully, as we understand this, we won't, drive through yellow arches, the experience, that we'll keep it, that we'll use this pursuit to try and really spark the best of human beings, and we'll, the point being that we'll, in the future, just like Black Hill, being on the top of Black Hill, I was there a year ago. That's a magic spot, and that's a quite similar. I get a quite similar response to that experience as I did at the temple in Matsushima, and hopefully we'll focus that and bring our positive energy as a culture, as a people, and learn how to elicit that and realize what a treasure that is, and instead of trying to commodify it and making a profit, that we'll actually be working with our new technology and deeper understanding to increase the positive human experience in existence. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope AI never takes over washing dishes. Washing dishes is a great way to go into the present.
One of the few choice I have.
I think there might be a future Dharma talk on washing dishes.
Oh
Daisho,
yeah, I definitely been thinking about that one too. So
Daisho,
again, thank you so much for your time and for all the questions and comments you made. And thank you for carrying on the practice in your temple. And again, I'm just really glad that I got to be a part of that today with you. So
thank you. Daisho, I'm going to stop the recording. You're welcome to stay with us. We usually close with the 4 vows here, and then we do some announcements, and really, really great to spend time with you.
happy to be here. I'll stick around for the 4 vows and then probably bounce at that point.
To the bounce house?
No, good point. But no, I'll back to my sister's house, hang out with my niece and nephew and my brother-in-law and whatnot.
Enjoy your time in Denver.
Thank you very much.